2, 3. Hello, and welcome to our house as we do Love in the Time of COVID, Part 2. And last time we talked about the concepts of grace and bitterness as being super relevant to a time when marriages are caught in quarantine. And everyone's in the house together, and there's a lot of emotions that come out, and bitterness is one of the big ones that comes out, one of the most damaging ones that can come out within a marriage. And we talked about the idea that this is why grace has to be given within a relationship in abundance.
If bitterness is the poison, grace is the antidote.
And so at the end of our last class, we had a little assignment, and we said that people should look for an opportunity in the relationship, in the house, to give grace. And so to be ready when your spouse says something that slights you, or an edgy word, or something irritating,
rubs
or
you the wrong way.
Yeah, just something that rubs you the wrong way. And then to be ready in that moment to shower grace on that person, and to kind of take note of what happened. And so I hope you were able to do that, and you were able to keep that at the forefront of your mind. I know that that's hard to do. We've been having to do that today.
Ironically, putting together this lesson.
Yeah.
There's been lots of opportunities for that antidote.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever written a lesson together, but normally it goes really smoothly. There's never any arguments, or we both have a lot of opinions, and we have a strong will. We like to see things done the way that we like to have them done. And
for instance, what I wanted to start with was witty banter. I skipped over the witty banter.
I tried to explain to her that you can't plan wit, nor can you plan banter. Like, that stuff happens because of chemistry.
But I'm assuming if we're bantering, it's going to be witty.
I think banter and wit is going to happen. It can't be planned. Is my.
So there's been opportunities for grace.
Yeah, and this is going to be hard maybe for you to believe, but this is probably take number 25 on this particular video.
That's how we got so good at the high five.
We've been doing a lot of high fives.
Because we practiced it.
And so I think one of the scriptures that we'd like to use as the theme for today would be Hebrews 12 verses 15, which says, "See to it that no one falls short." Now, you don't like that translation. What's
the older NIV says, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God." I like that image.
See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. And I really like the way that it describes bitterness there, because it does cause so much trouble within relationships, within dynamics, and it defiles many things. And I don't know if you guys have ever been on a date and everything was going well. You're with your spouse and the stars are aligned. You've got babysitting. You're at your favorite place. You're talking and it's fun. And then just one thing gets said. Just something that...
It could even be just a slight tilt of the head. Something doesn't even have to be said.
But and the bitterness comes out in one or both people, and it completely ruins the moment, and it ruins the night. And that really is what bitterness does. It defiles. And we defined bitterness as a settled hostility that poisons the inner self. And I really do like the way that is defined, because it's like a concealed wrath, and it's definitely something that's happening internally that isn't taking place all the time. It is brought up by moments, and it's brought up by incidences. And when a relation begins to become defined by bitterness, the hostility that takes place within the relationship it doesn't even make sense at times. Bitterness is popping up all over the place. And so I thought what we do to begin today is to just look at some areas, or look at some concepts, some ways that bitterness manifests itself in a relationship. And one of the most damaging ones. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, and one of the reasons we were thinking it might be helpful to have a list of these signs of bitterness, the ways that bitterness manifests, is because rarely does anyone say, "Oh, I'm full of bitterness. I'm just a bitter person." We don't really say that. Instead, we say things like, "Well, I'm not bitter. I'm just upset at the way he does this," or "I'm just angry at this." But rarely do we claim to be bitter. So we thought if we could kind of look through what are some of the more common signs of bitterness, it might help us each identify, okay, where are the places in my heart that are bitter?
And to be honest, I think probably every relationship, or most relationships, have areas of bitterness within those relationships. And so just because you have bitterness doesn't mean you have a bad relationship.
It means you've interacted and you've gotten hurt.
Yeah. And so, but it's important to admit it. It's important to identify those areas. I think one of the ways that bitterness really manifests itself is in something called contempt, which honestly, it's hard to define contempt. It's definitely a type of disgust, or I don't know, what would you say, babe?
That's the word I was thinking of. Just a disgust, just a deep
You can almost
disdain.
tell.
Disdain is the word I use.
You can almost tell, because you'll see two spouses, and maybe they'll be in a group of people, and one of the spouses is talking, and everyone else is smiling and laughing, and the spouse who's watching their husband or wife talk just has like a sour look on their face, like, I've heard this story so many times, or and there's just it's a disparaging, just almost condescension, it's and that is one of the primary signs of bitterness.
Yeah.
You had some thoughts on this.
Well, I just think it's bitterness or contempt is by no means something that only women show. I know that men show it, but I also know that women, I think we can be brutal on our husbands at points. I don't know, women, you get a bunch of women together in a room and it's so easy for, if I mean, think about it. The last time you were with a group of your friends and you're talking about your husbands, what was the tenor of that discussion? Was it a bunch of uplifting words and encouragements about who your husband is, or were they contempt? Was it contemptuous? And sometimes we could do it almost like try to be humorous, but again, like Chris said, you see it when there is a contempt. And even for Christian women, I think sometimes we can do it. We can, if we attach a spiritual word to it, if we assign sin to our husband, then we can almost think it's okay then for us to show contempt because he's so lazy, or he's so selfish, or he's whatever. But contempt, I think, is a huge hallmark, a huge sign of bitterness. And conversely, when people don't show contempt, but when they show honor, I notice that in a spouse. I feel like Chris does an incredible job of lifting me up. I think I hear him talk about me in my presence or outside of my presence. He does an incredible job of lifting me up and not showing contempt. So.
When I like this idea of contempt often showing itself when people are talking about their spouses, and like, hey, what's your wife up to? Probably at home watching another show, and it's just, it's supposed to be funny, but it's really disparaging, and it's just an undercutting of your spouse, and there's been studies that show that contempt is one of the markers for people who will one day get a divorce. That where contempt goes unchecked, separation becomes almost inevitable. And so, but it's definitely a sign of there being hurt in the past that has not been dealt with, has not been forgiven, and where there's not been grace applied to that hurt. I think one of the other ways that bitterness shows itself is through comparison, in the way that in our minds or even out loud, we can compare our spouses to somebody else. Like, why can't you learn to cook like so and so, or why can't our house be clean like the Smith's house is clean? Or you're saying something that is a comparison to somebody else.
Yeah, I think another way we can show bitterness in comparison is even comparing us to one another, in the sense of, well, I do all of it. I do X, Y, and Z, and he doesn't do anything like that. Like that kind of comparison with one another, what he does, what I do. And I'm not saying that we can't discuss these things and have thoughts about it, but I think a lot of times it comes out in bitterness. I know for me, I can get passive aggressive, when I start thinking about everything I do around, then I'm stomping around and people are like, is anything wrong?
Well, in comparison to the normal course of life is necessary. But when we use comparison as a way to couch our insults, or the way to couch our disappointments or our anger, that's a sure sign of bitterness growing within a relationship. And comparisons is one of those things where you start comparing your spouse, and you start getting bold in that, you start saying things that that's going to stay with your spouse. You comparing them to someone else is not something you can take away, and it's something that stays in the heart. I think obviously anger is a sure sign of bitterness, just like a flare up out of nowhere. It doesn't completely make sense. It's a last time we said it's kind of like a storm that comes in and leaves again. And, anger in and of itself can do damage, but anger in itself doesn't necessarily do lasting damage. But anger that happens spontaneously in places that don't completely make sense is definitely a sign that there is bitterness growing within a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think with anger too, one of the dangers is then the conversations that actually do need to happen to help get the bitterness out and to help get the grace, they end up not happening because people are afraid, the other spouse is afraid of putting it out there because I don't know if the volcano is about to explode or not. No.
Yeah. And I think one of the other big ones that we've identified as a sign of bitterness is just the use of cruel words. You know, and they're like, Megan, there are certain words that they hurt me personally. They may not even hurt everybody else, but they would certainly hurt me. And those could be wielded like a terrible weapon in a relationship. And when we start using those words on purpose to cause pain or to cause hurt, and sometimes we begin doing, people can start doing that, so unconsciously. That's a definite sign that bitterness has taken root within a relationship, and it's not really being dealt with.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like cruelty is it's like a hardened anger, because with the anger, Chris alluded to this, but I can say things in anger that I can never get back, and then seeds of insecurity are planted within him. If I threaten to, well, I don't know if I should be in this marriage. I don't know if I made the right choice. Like things like that I say in anger, even if I don't really mean it, but I say it in anger, and then it produces those insecurities. But then over time, if left unchecked, it hardens into cruelty, and I begin saying those things to hurt him. I begin saying those things to make sure that they feel, I want to wound with my words. There's the idea of public shaming sometimes that you see. Again, spouses throwing these things out where you're actually aiming to hurt. I think a good idea to ask yourself is, in those situations, just what was my intent in saying that? Why did I say that? And be honest enough not to just say, well, because he needs to hear, but was I aiming to hurt? Because if I'm aiming to hurt, I've gone from being angry and bitter to being cruel and bitter. It's entrenched then.
And the thing about cruelty is the longer you do it, the less capacity you have to feel bad about what you just did.
Yeah.
The more you get cruel, and Megan talked about it as a hardening, and that is what happens. And so all of those are.
Oh, I got one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Just the last one too. Another sign of bitterness, I think, is when we withhold from our spouse legitimate needs, things that they need. So we can withhold our affection, we can withhold our support, we can withhold sex, we can withhold things that should be in this relationship because I got all this stuff going on about how he is or how he isn't. So again, I think the withholding is another common fruit of bitterness that you'll see. And there's obviously many more. You have your own set within your marriage, but I think these are some of the ones that we see most often in our marriage and in other marriages.
And the point of bringing these up isn't to go, okay, I got to stop being angry, or I've got to stop using contemptuous words. The point of bringing this up is to go, if these are patterns within a relationship, yes, you need to not be angry, but more importantly, you need to find where that bitterness is, and you need to deal with that.
There's symptoms pointing to something going on.
Because bitterness will manifest itself in some other harmful way if you just deal with the symptom itself. And so.